The smell of burning fabric still clung to my hair 3 days later, no matter how many times I washed it. Maya Rodriguez pressed her face against the cool window of the city bus, watching the familiar streets of Millfield blur past in the October morning light. Her reflection stared back, 22 years old, tired eyes that had seen too much, and the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. She clutched a small canvas tote bag containing everything she owned now: 2 pairs of jeans borrowed from her college roommate, 3 mismatched t-shirts from the campus lost and found, and a single photograph she'd managed to save from the flames. The photograph was of her and her younger sister Carmen at last year's family barbecue. Carmen's arm draped around Maya's shoulders, both of them laughing at something their cousin had said. Maya's fingers traced the edges of the picture, now slightly warped from the heat that had destroyed everything else. In the photo, Carmen wore the vintage leather jacket Maya had saved for 2 years to buy, the same jacket that was now nothing but ash in their backyard. Maya's phone buzzed against her leg. Another text from her father. "Mija, please come home. Carmen feels terrible. She said she's sorry. Family forgives family." The same message he'd been sending since Tuesday, when Maya had walked out of their house for what she'd sworn would be the last time. Her thumb hovered over the delete button, but something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the memory of her father's voice when he'd called her that morning, strained and uncertain in a way she'd never heard before. The bus lurched to a stop at Maple Street, and Maya recognized the red brick facade of her childhood home immediately. She hadn't meant to get off here. Her intended destination was another 20 minutes away, the small apartment above the bakery where her friend Sophia had offered her a place to stay. But her legs carried her down the aisle and onto the sidewalk before her mind could protest. The house looked exactly the same as it had 3 days ago, except for the faint black stain on the concrete patio where her clothes had burned. She could see it from the sidewalk, and her stomach clenched with fresh anger. 22 years of memories reduced to a charcoal smudge behind the tool shed. Her prom dress, her graduation cap and gown, her favorite sweater that her grandmother had knitted before she died. All of it gone because Carmen had been in one of her moods. Maya's best friend Elena had been texting her non-stop since Tuesday. "Come stay with us," she'd written. "My mom made up the guest room." Elena's family had always been Maya's safe harbor during the storms at home. Mrs. Vasquez made the kind of Puerto Rican comfort food that could heal almost anything, and she never asked too many questions when Maya showed up with red eyes and fresh bruises to her spirit. But it was Maya's other friend, Marcus, who had said the thing that kept echoing in her mind. "You know this isn't normal, right? Sisters don't just burn each other's stuff, and parents don't just say, 'she's sorry,' like that fixes everything." Marcus had grown up in foster care, had seen enough family dysfunction to recognize it from a mile away. His words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Maya pulled out her phone and stared at her father's text again. The words felt hollow, rehearsed. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire life. "Carmen's bipolar, Maya. She can't help it. She loves you. Family sticks together." But there was something different this time, something that made Maya's instincts prick with suspicion. Her father's voice on the phone that morning held a note she couldn't identify. Guilt, maybe? Or fear? The front door of the house opened, and Maya's breath caught. Carmen stepped out onto the porch, her dark hair catching the morning sunlight. Even from across the street, Maya could see that her sister had been crying. Her eyes searched the street until they found Maya standing by the bus stop, and for a moment the two sisters just stared at each other across the gulf that had opened between them. Carmen was 19, 3 years younger than Maya, but she had always seemed older in some ways. She was the dramatic one, the artistic one, the one who felt everything too intensely and expressed it in ways that left wreckage behind. Maya had spent most of her childhood and teenage years cleaning up after Carmen's emotional hurricanes, making excuses to teachers and friends, covering for her when she disappeared for days at a time.
But this was different. This felt deliberate in a way that Carmen's usual outbursts didn't. Maya had been at work on Tuesday, pulling a double shift at the veterinary clinic where she was a technician. She'd come home exhausted, looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and her favorite flannel pajamas. Instead, she'd found her father and Carmen standing in the backyard, watching the last of her belongings turn to ash in an old metal trash can. "It was an accident," Carmen had said, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to do laundry and the dryer caught fire and I panicked and I thought I could burn it outside before it spread and—" But Maya had seen the pattern. Her favorite things were gone. The leather jacket, the silk scarf her college professor had given her when she graduated summa cum laude, the vintage band t-shirt she'd found at a thrift store in Chicago. Carmen had left her old clothes untouched. Even in her panic, she'd somehow managed to sort through two people's wardrobes and only burn Maya's most treasured pieces. Maya's father, Roberto, had wrapped his arm around Carmen's shoulders and looked at Maya with the same expression he'd worn throughout their childhood: resigned, weary, pleading for understanding. "She's sorry, mija. Look at her. She's devastated. She made a mistake, but she's your sister. We're family." The memory made Maya's hands shake as she stood on the sidewalk. She tried to explain that families don't destroy each other's things, that sisters don't target their siblings' most precious possessions, that sorry doesn't resurrect 2 decades of irreplaceable memories. But her father had just repeated the same phrases he'd been using since Carmen was diagnosed at 16. Mental illness, not her fault, family forgives. Carmen was walking toward her now, crossing the street with tentative steps. She wore one of Maya's favorite sweaters, one that had somehow escaped the fire, and the sight of it made Maya's chest tighten with fresh grief and rage. "Maya, please." Carmen's voice was hoarse from crying. "I need to talk to you. I need to explain." "Explain what? Explain how you accidentally sorted through my entire wardrobe? Explain how you accidentally chose only my favorite things to burn?" Carmen flinched as if she'd been slapped. "I was having an episode. I wasn't thinking clearly. You know how I get when what? When I get a promotion at work? When I start dating someone? When things are going well for me?" The words spilled out before Maya could stop them, carrying years of suppressed resentment. Across the street, Maya could see her father watching them from the porch. Roberto Rodriguez was a good man. She'd always believed that. He worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table after their mother died when Maya was 12. He drove Maya to college interviews and cheered loudest at her graduation. But he'd also spent a decade enabling Carmen's increasingly destructive behavior. And Maya was beginning to understand that good intentions didn't always lead to good outcomes. A car pulled into the driveway and Maya recognized her Aunt Lucia's silver Honda. Lucia was Roberto's sister, a woman who had never married or had children, but who had strong opinions about how everyone else should live their lives. She emerged from the car with her usual purposeful stride, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark eyes taking in the scene with characteristic sharpness. "Maya, mija, what are you doing standing out here like a stranger?" Lucia's voice carried across the yard. "Come inside. We need to talk." Maya felt trapped between her sister's tear-stained face and her aunt's expectant expression. This was how it always went. The family would rally around Carmen, and Maya would be expected to forgive and forget and pretend that nothing had happened. She'd be the mature one, the understanding one, the one who absorbed the damage and kept the peace.
But something was different this time. Maybe it was the smell of smoke that still lingered in her dreams, or the way her father's voice had shaken when he called that morning, or the strange look in Carmen's eyes when she'd claimed it was an accident. Maya felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that she deserved better than this. "I'm not coming inside," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not until someone tells me the truth about what really happened on Tuesday." Carmen's face went pale. "I told you the truth. I explained. You told me a story. But stories and truth aren't always the same thing, are they?" She turned and walked back toward the bus stop, ignoring Carmen's calls and her father's voice joining in from the porch. Maya didn't know what the truth was yet,
But she was certain of one thing. She was done accepting explanations that didn't make sense just to keep the family peace. As the next bus pulled up, Maya caught sight of something she hadn't noticed before. A small black device mounted under the eaves of the Hendersons' house next door. The Ring doorbell camera that old Mrs. Henderson had installed after someone stole packages from her porch last Christmas. The camera that would have captured a perfect view of the Rodriguez family's backyard. Maya climbed onto the bus with a new sense of purpose. She had always been good at solving puzzles. It was part of what made her an excellent veterinary technician. Animals couldn't lie about their symptoms, so she'd learned to read the signs that others missed, to piece together the truth from fragments of evidence. Maybe it was time to apply those same skills to her own family. Maya's apartment above Sophia's bakery smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread, but even those comforting scents couldn't ease the knot in her stomach. She sat cross-legged on the narrow bed, her laptop balanced on her knees, staring at a blank document titled Timeline, Tuesday, October 10th. The cursor blinked accusingly at her, waiting for her to make sense of the pieces that didn't fit. She'd been doing this for hours now, trying to reconstruct Tuesday evening from memory, looking for the details that proved something was wrong with Carmen's story. Maya had always been methodical, a trait that served her well at the veterinary clinic, where careful observation could mean the difference between life and death for her patients. Dr. Patel had noticed this quality during her first week on the job 2 years ago when Maya had spotted the subtle signs of bloat in a golden retriever that everyone else had dismissed as simple indigestion. "You see what others miss," Dr. Patel had told her then. "That's a rare gift." Now Maya wondered if that gift had been both a blessing and a curse in her family. She'd been the one to notice when Carmen stopped taking her medication, the one who recognized the warning signs before Carmen's episodes, the one who learned to read the weather patterns of her sister's moods. But all that careful attention had never been enough to prevent the storms. It had only made her better at cleaning up afterwards. Maya typed, Timeline, Tuesday, October 10th, and began filling in what she knew for certain. She left for work at 6:30 a.m., picked up coffee from Sophia's bakery. Sophia remembered because Maya had seemed excited about something. What had she been excited about? And arrived at the clinic by 7 a.m. It had been a busy day. 3 surgeries, 2 emergency walk-ins, and a complicated case involving a cat with diabetes that had kept her there until nearly 9 p.m. She remembered texting her father around lunchtime to let him know she'd be late. His response had been immediate. "No problem, mija. Carmen's home today. We'll save you dinner." At the time, Maya had thought nothing of it. Carmen had been having a good week. She'd been taking her medication regularly, sleeping normal hours, even talking about enrolling in community college classes for the spring semester. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through her text messages from that day. There it was, the exchange with her father at 12:47 p.m. But as she read it again, something struck her as odd. Carmen's home today. Not Carmen's home or Carmen's here, Carmen's home today. As if her being home was somehow significant, planned, unusual. Maya frowned and kept typing. She'd gotten home at 9:23 p.m. She knew the exact time because she'd checked her phone while fumbling for her house keys in the dark. The first thing she'd noticed was the smell, not the acrid scent of electrical fire that Carmen had described, but something more chemical, more deliberate, like lighter fluid or the camping fuel their father used for his Coleman lantern. The second thing she'd noticed was the silence. Carmen was never quiet, especially when she was upset. She was a talker, a crier, someone who processed emotions through sound and movement. But when Maya had walked into the backyard and found her father and Carmen standing by the smoldering trash can, Carmen had been unnaturally still, almost frozen. Maya's fingers hesitated over the keyboard as she tried to capture the memory accurately. Carmen's eyes had been red, yes, but from crying or from smoke. Her hands had been clean.
Maya remembered noticing that specifically because she'd expected them to be dirty if Carmen had really been frantically hauling burning clothes outside. And there had been something else, something that had bothered Maya at the time, but that she'd pushed aside in the shock of seeing her belongings destroyed. Carmen had been wearing makeup. Full makeup, as if she'd gotten dressed up for something. Who puts on mascara and lipstick to do laundry on a Tuesday evening? Maya stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out over Main Street. Below her, she could see the evening crowd gathering at Murphy's pub across the street, young professionals unwinding after long days at their respectable jobs. Maya had been one of them once, stopping by for happy-hour drinks and meaningless conversations about weekend plans. But since Carmen's diagnosis, Maya's evenings had been consumed by family drama, crisis management, and the exhausting work of keeping the peace. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Elena's name appeared on the screen, along with a photo from their college graduation. Two young women with their arms around each other, grinning at the camera with the kind of confidence that only comes from not yet knowing how complicated life can get. "Hey, E," Maya answered, settling back onto the bed. "Don't hey me." Elena's voice was sharp with concern. "You've been radio silent for 2 days? Mom's convinced you're lying dead in a ditch somewhere." Maya smiled despite herself. Mrs. Vasquez had a tendency toward dramatic worry, but it came from a place of genuine love. "I'm fine. I'm staying at Sophia's place, remember? Above the bakery on Main Street." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Elena's voice softened. "How are you holding up? Really?" Maya looked around the small room that Sophia had offered her. Clean white walls, a single window, a bed barely big enough for one person. It was smaller than her childhood bedroom, smaller than her dorm room had been, but it was hers. No one could burn her belongings here. No one could gaslight her into accepting unacceptable behavior. "I think Carmen lied," Maya said quietly. "About the fire, about it being an accident. I think she did it on purpose, and Dad knows." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elena had been Maya's roommate for 3 years in college, had seen the aftermath of enough family crises to understand the patterns. "Okay, so what makes you think that?" Elena asked carefully. Maya told her about the timeline, about Carmen's makeup, about her father's strange behavior. As she spoke, she could hear Elena taking notes, a habit left over from their journalism classes. "Okay, so what are you going to do about it?" Elena asked when Maya finished. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya had spent so much energy over the years documenting Carmen's behavior, trying to understand it, trying to predict it. But she'd never taken the next step, never demanded accountability, never refused to accept the family narrative that mental illness excused everything. "I don't know," Maya admitted. I've never really thought back before." "Maybe it's time to start," Elena said gently. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, Maya, and you can't keep setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm." After they hung up, Maya sat in the gathering darkness of her small room and thought about Elena's words. Setting herself on fire. It was an apt metaphor. She'd been doing it for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to not be burning. Maya opened her laptop again and created a new document. "What I know for sure," she typed at the top. Then she began listing facts, separating them carefully from assumptions and family mythology. Fact: Carmen had been home alone all day on Tuesday while Maya worked and their father was at his job at the warehouse. Fact: Carmen had been fully dressed and made up when Maya found her in the backyard, despite claiming to have been doing laundry and fighting a fire. Fact: only Maya's most treasured possessions had been destroyed, while Carmen's clothes and their father's belongings remained untouched. Fact: Carmen had a history of destructive episodes that coincided with Maya's successes or happy moments. Fact: Their father always made excuses for Carmen's behavior and expected Maya to forgive and forget. As she typed, Maya found herself remembering other incidents she'd pushed aside over the years. The time Carmen had accidentally deleted Maya's college application essays the night before they were due. The time she'd borrowed Maya's car for a joyride and returned it with a dented bumper and an empty gas tank. The time she told Maya's high school boyfriend that Maya was cheating on him, causing a breakup that had devastated Maya for months. Each incident had been explained away, rationalized, blamed on Carmen's mental illness or medication side effects or stress. Maya had accepted these explanations because the alternative, that her sister was deliberately sabotaging her, seemed too cruel to believe. But patterns didn't lie, and Maya was finally ready to see the pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Her phone buzzed with another text from her father. "Mija, please call me. We need to talk. Carmen's been crying all day. She says she wants to make things right." Maya stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I'll call you tomorrow, Dad. But first, I need to know what really happened on Tuesday. The whole truth, not just the version that makes everyone feel better." She hit send before she could lose her nerve, then turned off her phone and set it aside. Tomorrow she would start asking the questions she should have been asking all along. Tomorrow she would stop accepting easy answers and start demanding real ones. Tonight, for the first time in years, Maya fell asleep without the weight of her family's expectations pressing down on her chest. Maya woke to the sound of her phone ringing at 6:47 a.m. The number belonged to her father, but the voice that answered when she picked up was Carmen's. "Maya, thank God." Carmen's words tumbled out in a rush. "Dad had to go to work early, and I didn't know who else to call. I think someone broke into our house last night. The police are here, and they're asking questions about the fire, and I don't know what to tell them." Maya sat up in bed, instantly alert. What kind of questions? "They're saying someone called in a tip about suspicious activity, and they want to know if we have any enemies or if there's been any family drama lately." Carmen's voice was shaking.
Maya, they're looking at me like I'm a criminal. Please come home. I can't handle this alone. Maya's mind raced. A tip about suspicious activity? Who would have called the police, and why now, 3 days after the fire? Carmen, slow down. What exactly did the police say when they arrived? They said someone reported seeing unusual smoke and flame patterns from our backyard on Tuesday night, and that the person who called it in said it looked deliberate, not accidental. Carmen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Maya, I think someone's trying to get me in trouble. I think they want to break up our family." The paranoia in Carmen's voice was familiar. It often accompanied her episodes. But Maya found herself wondering if, for once, Carmen's suspicions might be justified. Who had been watching their backyard on Tuesday night, and why had they waited 3 days to report it? "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Maya said, already pulling on yesterday's clothes. Maya caught the first bus of the morning, her mind churning with possibilities. The most obvious explanation was that one of the neighbors had finally gotten tired of the Rodriguez family drama and decided to involve the authorities. The Hendersons next door had complained before about Carmen's late-night music and emotional outbursts. Old Mr. Peterson across the street had never liked having a troubled family in the neighborhood, a fact he'd made clear in passive-aggressive comments at community meetings. But as the bus wound through the familiar streets of her childhood neighborhood, Maya found herself thinking about something else entirely. The Ring doorbell camera she'd noticed on the Hendersons' porch. Mrs. Henderson had installed it 6 months ago after a series of package thefts, and Maya remembered the woman mentioning at a neighborhood barbecue that the device recorded everything that happened within 50 feet of her front door. Everything, including the Rodriguez family's backyard. Maya's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and did a quick Google search for Ring doorbell camera range. The results confirmed what she'd suspected. The camera would have captured a clear view of Tuesday night's fire, but more than that, it would have audio. The newer models recorded sound along with video, which meant, which meant there might be a record of what Carmen and their father had actually said that night, not just the sanitized version Maya had been given. The bus pulled up to Maple Street just as a police car was backing out of the Rodriguez driveway. Maya saw Officer Janet Mills behind the wheel, a woman she'd known since high school, when Mills had been a security guard at their school, and Maya had been a straight-A student with a perfect attendance record. Mills waved as she drove past, but her expression was serious, professional. Maya found Carmen sitting on the front porch steps, still in her pajamas despite it being nearly 8 a.m. Her sister's dark hair was tangled, her eyes red-rimmed, and she was clutching a cup of coffee with both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. "What did Officer Mills want to know?" Maya asked, sitting down beside Carmen on the steps. She asked about our relationship, about whether we'd been fighting lately, about my mental health history. Carmen's voice was flat, exhausted. She asked if I'd been taking my medication regularly and if I'd had any episodes recently. Maya, she knows. Somehow, she knows about my diagnosis, about the hospital stays, about everything. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning air. Mental health records were supposed to be confidential, but small towns had a way of making private information public. Still, Officer Mills was professional, discreet. She wouldn't have brought up Carmen's medical history unless she had a specific reason. Did she say who called in the tip? "Anonymous," Carmen said bitterly. "Someone called the non-emergency line yesterday and said they had video evidence that Tuesday night's fire was intentionally set. They're reviewing the footage today." Maya's heart started pounding. Video evidence? That had to be Mrs. Henderson's Ring camera. But who had access to the footage? Mrs. Henderson was in her 70s, barely comfortable with her smartphone, let alone modern security technology. Her grandson Tyler, maybe? He was home from college for fall break, and Maya had seen him around the neighborhood recently. "Carmen," Maya said carefully, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened Tuesday night. Not the version you told Dad. Not the version you told the police. The truth." Carmen set down her coffee cup and wrapped her arms around her knees. For a long moment, she stared at the street where Maya had stood the day before, and Maya could see the internal struggle playing out across her sister's face. "I can't," Carmen whispered finally. "If I tell you the truth, you'll hate me forever. And if Dad finds out, God, Maya, if Dad finds out what I did, it'll kill him." "The truth is going to come out anyway," Maya said gently. "If there's video evidence, if the police are involved, Carmen, whatever you did, lying about it now is only going to make things worse." Carmen started crying then, the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that Maya had seen so many times over the years. But this time, Maya didn't automatically move to comfort her sister. Instead, she waited, giving Carmen space to make the choice between truth and self-protection. "I was angry," Carmen said finally, her words broken by tears. "I was so angry, and I couldn't make it stop. You got that promotion at work, and everyone was so proud of you, and I felt invisible, like I only existed when I was having a crisis, when I needed to be managed or contained or fixed." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So you burned my clothes to get attention?" "No," Carmen shook her head violently. "It wasn't about attention. It was about... God, Maya, you're going to think I'm a monster." "Tell me." Carmen took a shuddering breath. "I wanted to hurt you the way you were hurting me. Every time something good happened to you, it felt like proof that I was broken, that I was the failure in the family. And I knew that if I took away the things you loved most, you'd feel as empty as I felt. Just for a little while." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd suspected that the fire was intentional, but hearing Carmen admit that she'd calculated which items would cause the most emotional damage was somehow worse than Maya had imagined. "Your leather jacket," Carmen continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You wore it on your first date with David, and that silk scarf from Professor Martinez,
You always said it made you feel sophisticated, professional. I knew exactly what each thing meant to you, and I chose them specifically because I wanted to take away pieces of your happiness." Maya stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. She felt dizzy, nauseated, as if the world had tilted sideways. "How long have you been doing this? How many times have you deliberately sabotaged me and blamed it on your mental illness? Maya, please! How many times?" Maya's voice was sharp, cutting. Carmen buried her face in her hands. "I don't know. Some of it really was accidents, really was episodes. But some of it was just me being jealous and cruel and using my diagnosis as an excuse." Before Maya could respond, their father's truck pulled into the driveway. Roberto Rodriguez climbed out slowly, his face gray with exhaustion and something else. Something that looked like defeat. He'd clearly been crying, and when he saw his daughters on the porch, his shoulders sagged even further. "The police came to my work," he said without preamble. "They wanted to know about the fire, about Carmen's history, about family dynamics. Maya, they asked me if I thought Carmen was capable of intentionally hurting you." Maya stared at her father, reading the answer in his eyes before he spoke.
"I told them the truth," Roberto said quietly. "I told them that I've been covering for Carmen for years, making excuses, enabling her to hurt you because I was afraid of losing her too. After your mother died, I couldn't bear the thought of another family member being broken beyond repair. So I sacrificed you to save her, and I've been carrying that guilt for so long that I forgot there was another choice." The admission hung in the air like smoke from Tuesday night's fire. Maya felt years of confusion and self-doubt crystallize into something sharp and clear. Betrayal. Not just from Carmen, but from the father who was supposed to protect her. "The police are coming back this afternoon," Roberto continued. "They have footage from the Henderson's security camera. Officer Mills said we should all be prepared to answer some difficult questions." Maya walked down the porch steps and toward the street, needing distance from her family's pain and her own rising anger. As she moved, she caught sight of Mrs. Henderson peering through her front window, her elderly face creased with concern. Their eyes met for a moment, and Maya saw something unexpected in the older woman's expression. Determination. Mrs. Henderson had made the call. The woman who had watched Maya grow up, who had seen years of family dysfunction play out in the yard next door, had finally decided to act. Maya felt a surge of gratitude mixed with grief. It had taken a neighbor's intervention to force her family to confront the truth they'd all been avoiding. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Melina. "Mom's making dinner tonight. Come eat with people who actually love you." The simple invitation felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. But first, Maya had to face whatever was on that security footage. She had to see with her own eyes what her family had hidden from her, and then she had to decide whether 22 years of history was worth salvaging, or if it was time to let it burn completely. At exactly 2 p.m., Officer Janet Mills returned to the Rodriguez house with a tablet in her hands and a grim expression on her face. Maya had spent the morning sitting in Sophia's bakery, nursing cup after cup of coffee while Sophia worked around her with the kind of gentle efficiency that came from years of witnessing small-town drama unfold over her counter. "You don't have to go," Sophia had said, refilling Maya's cup for the 4th time. "Whatever's on that video, it won't change what you already know in your heart." But Maya did have to go. She'd spent too many years accepting other people's versions of events, trusting explanations that didn't quite add up, believing that her perceptions were somehow flawed. If there was finally objective proof of what had happened Tuesday night, she needed to see it with her own eyes. Now she sat in her family's living room, flanked by her father and Carmen on the old sectional her mother had picked out 15 years ago. The room felt smaller than she remembered, cramped with unspoken truths and the weight of Officer Mills's presence. Maya noticed details she somehow missed growing up here. The way the family photos on the mantel were arranged to hide Carmen's absence from important events. the subtle wear patterns on the furniture that showed how they'd all learned to navigate around Carmen's moods. Officer Mills set the tablet on the coffee table, its screen dark and ominous. "Before we watch this," she said, her voice professional but not unkind, "I want everyone to understand that what we're about to see is evidence in a potential criminal investigation. Mrs. Henderson came forward yesterday because she was concerned about Maya's welfare, not because she wanted to cause trouble for this family." Maya glanced at her father, who was staring at his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Carmen sat perfectly still beside him, her breathing shallow and rapid. Maya could practically feel her sister's panic radiating across the space between them. The footage begins at approximately 8:45 p.m. on Tuesday, October 10th, Officer Mills continued. Mrs. Henderson's Ring camera has both video and audio capabilities, and the quality is quite clear. She paused, looking directly at Carmen. "Miss Rodriguez, before we proceed, do you want to revise your statement about Tuesday evening's events?" Carmen's voice came out as barely a whisper. What if I said some things on the video that I didn't mean? What if I was having an episode and I said things that sound worse than they actually were?" Officer Mills' expression didn't change. "We'll address any concerns after we review the evidence." She pressed play, and Maya's childhood backyard appeared on the screen in the harsh glow of their motion sensor light. The timestamp read 8:47 p.m., and Maya could see Carmen clearly in the frame, standing next to the metal trash can with what looked like a can of lighter fluid in her hand. But Carmen wasn't in the middle of fighting a fire, she was starting one. Maya watched her sister methodically pour accelerant over a pile of clothes, her movements deliberate and careful. There was no panic in Carmen's posture, no sign of the frantic emergency she described. Instead, she looked focused, almost ritualistic in her actions. The audio crackled through the tablet speakers as Carmen struck a match. "This is for getting the promotion I applied for." Carmen's voice was clear, cold. "This is for Dad being proud of you instead of worried about you." Another match. "This is for being the daughter who never needs fixing." Maya felt the blood drain from her face as she watched her sister feed item after item into the growing flames. Carmen held up Maya's leather jacket, the one she'd saved for months to buy, and spoke directly to it, as if it could hear her. "You made her feel confident," Carmen said to the jacket. "You made her feel like she was worth something. Let's see how confident she feels with nothing." Maya's graduation cap went next, then the silk scarf from Professor Martinez, then the vintage band t-shirt. With each item, Carmen offered a small monologue about why it needed to be destroyed, what happiness it had brought Maya that Carmen wanted to take away. The footage was devastating in its clarity. There was no episode, no mental health crisis, just calculated malice dressed up as sibling rivalry. But the worst part came 20 minutes later when their father's truck pulled into the driveway. Maya watched Roberto get out and walk directly to the backyard, showing no surprise at finding Carmen burning things in the trash can. Instead, he handed her what looked like a bottle of water and said, "Did you get everything you wanted to burn?" Carmen nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I saved the photo album for last. I wanted her to see what we were doing when she got home." "No," Roberto's voice was firm. "We talked about this, mija. The photo album stays. Maya needs to have something left or she'll never forgive us. And you need to look upset when she gets here. Can you cry on command?" Maya felt like she was drowning, watching her father coach Carmen on how to perform grief for the sister they were betraying. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Roberto helping Carmen arrange the scene to look accidental, suggesting excuses that would sound plausible, reminding her to mention her medication and stress levels. "Remember," Roberto said, as they heard Maya's car pulling into the driveway, "you panicked when the dryer caught fire. You grabbed everything you could see and brought it outside to contain the flames. You're devastated that you couldn't save her things. Can you do that?" "I can do that," Carmen replied, and Maya watched her sister transform before her eyes, shoulders slumping, face crumpling into an expression of anguish, hands beginning to shake with manufactured distress. Officer Mills paused the video. The living room was silent except for the sound of Maya's ragged breathing. She stared at the frozen image of her family staging her betrayal and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not just heartbreak, but a kind of relief. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't oversensitive. Her instincts had been right all along.
Maya. Her father's voice was broken, pleading. Let me explain. Explain what? Maya stood up abruptly, her voice cutting through the room like glass. Explain how you helped plan this? Explain how you coached Carmen on how to lie to me? Explain how you've been gaslighting me for years, making me think I was the problem. Roberto's face crumpled. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. After your mother died, Carmen fell apart. The suicide attempts, the hospital stays, the constant crisis calls from her school. I was terrified every day that I was going to lose her too. And you were so strong, so capable of handling anything. I thought you could absorb the damage better than she could. So you sacrificed me, Maya said quietly. You turned me into Carmen's emotional punching bag because you were afraid she couldn't handle being held accountable for her actions? Carmen finally spoke, her voice small and hollow. Maya, I know how this looks, but I really do love you. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, little things, minor sabotage, but every time Dad covered for me, it got easier to do worse things. And when you didn't fight back, when you just accepted my apologies and moved on, it felt like permission to keep going. Maya turned to face her sister fully. How long, Carmen? How many years of my life have you stolen from me? Carmen's eyes filled with tears, but Maya found herself unmoved by the display. She'd seen too many of Carmen's performances to trust them anymore. The college applications. Senior year. You were so excited about Northwestern, and I was barely passing my classes. I deleted your essays the night before the deadline because I couldn't stand watching you leave me behind. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She'd been devastated when her computer crashed that night, had spent hours trying to recover the files before finally giving up. She'd ended up attending the local state university instead, a good school, but not the dream school she'd worked so hard to reach. The car accident, Maya said, remembering her high school boyfriend who'd broken up with her junior year. You told him I was cheating. You made him think I was seeing someone else when I was working those extra shifts to pay for your car damage? Carmen nodded miserably. I couldn't stand seeing you happy when I was miserable. Every good thing that happened to you felt like proof that I was fundamentally broken, that I would never have what you had. Officer Mills cleared her throat, drawing their attention back to the official nature of her visit. Miss Rodriguez, what you've described constitutes a pattern of deliberate destruction of property, fraud, and emotional abuse. The fire on Tuesday night represents the most serious incident, but given what you've admitted today, we're looking at potentially criminal behavior spanning several years. Maya felt a surge of vindication mixed with grief. Finally, someone in authority was calling Carmen's behavior what it actually was, criminal, not just the unfortunate side effect of mental illness.
Officer Mills, Roberto said desperately, Carmen's been struggling with bipolar disorder since she was 16. She's been in and out of hospitals, on and off medication. Surely that has to count for something. Mr. Rodriguez, Officer Mills replied firmly, mental illness can explain behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. And what I saw on that video wasn't the impulsive action of someone in crisis. It was premeditated, deliberate, and cruel. Furthermore, your participation in covering up these incidents makes you an accessory to several crimes. Maya watched her father absorb this information, saw the exact moment when he realized that his years of enabling had consequences he'd never considered. Roberto had always seen himself as the good parent, the one who held the family together through impossible circumstances. Now he was being forced to confront the possibility that his good intentions had enabled years of abuse. "What happens now?" Maya asked Officer Mills. "That depends partly on you," the officer replied. "You're the victim in these incidents. You have the right to press charges for destruction of property, fraud, and emotional distress. Given the pattern of behavior Carmen has admitted to, the district attorney would likely pursue multiple felony charges." Maya looked at her sister, who was staring at her with barely concealed terror. For a moment, Carmen looked like the little girl she'd once been, Maya's shadow, her constant companion, the sister who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. But that little girl had grown into someone who could systematically destroy the people she claimed to love, and Maya was finally ready to stop protecting her from the consequences. "I need time to think," Maya said finally. "But Officer Mills, I want to file a report today about Tuesday night's fire. Whatever else I decide about the other incidents, Carmen needs to face real consequences for what she did this week." Carmen started crying again, but this time her tears seemed genuine, the kind of desperate, ugly sobbing that comes from finally understanding that actions have consequences, that mental illness doesn't provide infinite forgiveness, that the people you hurt might eventually decide to stop absorbing your damage. Roberto stood up and moved toward Maya, his arms outstretched as if to embrace her, but Maya stepped back. "Don't," she said quietly. "You lost the right to comfort me when you decided to help her hurt me." Maya walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. "I'm going to stay at Elena's tonight. Tomorrow, I'm going to decide what kind of future I want, and whether either of you gets to be part of it." As she left the house that had never truly been a home, Maya heard Carmen's sobs echoing behind her. But for the first time in her adult life, she felt no compulsion to turn back and fix what was broken. Some things, she was finally learning, were supposed to stay broken. Mrs. Henderson was sitting on her front porch when Maya walked past, and the elderly woman raised her hand in a small wave. Maya stopped and walked up the front path. "Thank you," Maya said simply. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her weathered face kind but sad. "I should have called sooner, mija. I've been watching that family hurt you for years, and I told myself it wasn't my business. But when I saw that video, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Maya felt tears spring to her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of gratitude for this woman who had finally given her the gift of objective truth. "You saved me," Maya said. "I don't think I could have saved myself." As Maya walked toward the bus stop, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the lightness that comes from setting down a burden you never should have been carrying in the first place. 3 months later, Maya stood in the doorway of her new apartment, a one-bedroom unit in a converted Victorian house on the opposite side of town from her childhood home. The space was small but bright, with hardwood floors and tall windows that let in streams of morning sunlight. She'd furnished it piece by piece with items she'd chosen herself: a blue velvet armchair from a thrift store, bookshelves assembled from a kit, artwork from local artists whose work spoke to her. Everything in this space belonged fully to Maya, carried no history of family drama or painful associations. She'd even bought new clothes, replacing the borrowed items she'd been wearing since the fire with pieces that reflected who she was becoming rather than who she'd been forced to be. Elena knocked on the open doorframe, carrying 2 cups of coffee from Sophia's bakery. "How does it feel?" she asked, settling into the blue armchair while Maya took her place on the small sofa she'd purchased last week. "Quiet," Maya said, and she meant it as the highest compliment. "I wake up in the morning and there's no crisis to manage, no one to worry about except myself. I'd forgotten what that felt like." The legal proceedings had moved swiftly once Maya decided to press charges. Carmen had been sentenced to 2 years of probation, community service, and mandatory therapy, not just for her bipolar disorder, but specifically for what the court-appointed psychologist had diagnosed as narcissistic personality traits and a pattern of emotional abuse.
Roberto had been charged as an accessory, but received a suspended sentence in exchange for his cooperation and his agreement to attend family therapy. Maya had been surprised by how little satisfaction she'd felt when the judge read Carmen's sentence. She'd expected vindication, triumph, the sweet taste of justice finally served. Instead, she'd felt only a deep sadness for the family they might have been if her parents had chosen honesty over enabling, accountability over peacekeeping. "Have you heard from them?" Elena asked gently. Maya nodded. "Dad calls once a week. He's been going to therapy, individual and family sessions with Carmen. He says they're working on understanding how the family dynamics developed after Mom died, how fear made him into an enabler instead of a parent." Maya pulled out her phone and showed Elena the latest text from Roberto. "Mija, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm finally seeing clearly. Carmen's therapist says she has deep-seated envy and entitlement issues that go beyond her bipolar disorder. I should have protected you instead of sacrificing you. I'm learning how to be the father you deserved." "That must be hard to read," Elena said. "It is, but it's also, I don't know, hopeful, maybe? For the first time in my life, Dad is seeing Carmen's behavior clearly instead of making excuses for it. And Carmen is actually being held accountable by a professional who won't buy into her manipulation tactics." Maya stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the small garden behind her building. Mrs. Chen, her elderly landlord, was out there tending to her late-season vegetables, and Maya had been learning from her about growing things, about patience and seasons, and the satisfaction of nurturing life rather than constantly managing damage. "Dr. Patel offered me a promotion," Maya said, changing the subject. "Lead veterinary technician, with a substantial raise and my own team of assistants." Elena grinned. "Maya, that's amazing! Are you going to take it?" "I already did. I start the new position next month." I felt a familiar flutter of excitement in my chest, but this time it wasn't accompanied by the anxiety that someone would try to sabotage my success. For the first time in my adult life, I get to be happy about good news without worrying about the fallout at home. The promotion felt different from her previous achievements. Maya had always been driven to succeed, but she realized now that much of her ambition had been motivated by a desperate need to prove her worth to a family that consistently devalued her. Now she was succeeding for herself because she enjoyed the work and was good at it, not because she needed external validation to feel whole. Maya's phone rang, and she was surprised to see Carmen's name on the screen. Her sister had been respecting the no-contact order that was part of her probation, communicating only through their father when necessary. Maya hesitated, then answered. "Maya?" Carmen's voice was different, smaller, less dramatic than Maya remembered. "I know I'm not supposed to call you directly, but I needed to tell you something, and I couldn't wait for our next family therapy session." "What is it, Carmen?" "I've been working with Dr. Rodriguez, my therapist, on understanding why I did the things I did to you, and I realized something that I need you to know." Carmen's voice was steady, clearer than Maya had heard it in years. "I was jealous of you, yes, but more than that, I was jealous of who you got to be. You were allowed to be successful and happy and confident because I was absorbing all the family's chaos and dysfunction. I was the identified patient, the problem child, the one who needed constant management. And you got to be normal because I was taking up all the space for being broken." Maya sat down heavily on her sofa, processing Carmen's words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I resented you for having what I gave up, but I also resented you for not appreciating what it cost me to give it up. Every time you succeeded, it felt like you were succeeding because of my sacrifice, but you didn't even know I was sacrificing anything." Carmen took a shaky breath. "Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that this is a really common dynamic in families dealing with mental illness. One child becomes the identified patient, and the other becomes the golden child, and they end up resenting each other instead of resenting the system that forced them into those roles."
Maya felt something shift in her understanding. Not enough to forgive Carmen's actions, but enough to see them in a different context. "That doesn't excuse what you did to me." "No, it doesn't," Carmen agreed quickly. "Nothing excuses the way I hurt you. But understanding why I did it helps me make sure I never do it again. Maya, I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking to be part of your life. I just wanted you to know that I finally see how wrong I was and how much damage I caused. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure I never hurt anyone like that again." After they hung up, Maya sat in her quiet apartment and thought about forgiveness, about family, about the difference between understanding and excusing. She didn't forgive Carmen, might never forgive her, but she found that she no longer carried the burning anger that had consumed her for months after the fire. Carmen's actions had been inexcusable, but Carmen herself was not irredeemable. She was a damaged person who had damaged others, now finally getting the help she should have received years ago. Alina had left to run errands, and Maya found herself alone with her thoughts in the afternoon sunlight streaming through her windows. She pulled out her laptop and opened a document she'd been working on for weeks, a letter to her younger self, the girl who had absorbed years of abuse and gaslighting and somehow survived with her kindness intact. "Dear Maya," she began typing, "you are not responsible for managing other people's emotions. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. Your instincts are good, and when something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, even if everyone around you insists otherwise." The letter had grown to several pages over the weeks, filled with all the wisdom Maya wished someone had given her at 15, at 18, at 20. She planned to keep it, a reminder to herself of how far she had come and how important it was to trust her own perceptions. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, her friend who'd grown up in foster care. "Movie night at my place Friday? My foster sister is visiting, and I want you to meet her. She's a survivor too, and I think you two would get along." Maya smiled as she typed back her acceptance. She was building a new kind of family now, chosen family. People who had earned their place in her life through kindness and respect, rather than biology and obligation. Elena, Sophia, Marcus, Dr. Patel, even Mrs. Chen downstairs. These were the people who celebrated her successes without reservation, who supported her without expecting her to diminish herself in return. The late afternoon sun was beginning to slant through her windows, painting everything in golden light. Maya made herself a cup of tea and settled into her blue armchair with a book she'd been meaning to read for months. For the first time in her adult life, she had time for things that brought her joy, rather than just occupying every free moment with family crisis management. As evening approached, Maya reflected on how much her life had changed since that Tuesday night in October. She'd lost a family, but she'd gained herself. She'd lost the illusion of unconditional love, but she'd found the reality of earned respect. She'd lost her childhood home, but she'd built a space where she could finally breathe. The Ring doorbell footage had given her more than just evidence of Carmen's betrayal. It had given her permission to trust her own reality, to stop gaslighting herself on behalf of people who had never protected her. Mrs. Henderson's courage in coming forward had shown Maya that sometimes strangers care more about your well-being than the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Maya's new life wasn't perfect. She still had moments of loneliness, still occasionally found herself reaching for her phone to call her father, before remembering that their relationship was forever changed. But loneliness, she'd discovered, was preferable to the constant anxiety of waiting for the next crisis, the next betrayal, the next demand that she minimize herself to accommodate someone else's dysfunction. As night fell over her quiet apartment, Maya felt something she'd never experienced before. The peace that comes from being exactly who you are, without apology or compromise, surrounded by people who love you not despite your boundaries, but because of them. But you know what? This year, I'm hosting Thanksgiving for my chosen family. I'm creating new traditions that aren't built on a foundation of dysfunction and enabling. After the meeting ended, Maya stayed behind to stack chairs and clean up, a routine that gave her time to process the evening's discussions. She'd been surprised by how healing it was to share her story with others who understood the complex guilt that came with setting boundaries with family members. In this room, no one questioned her decision to prioritize her well-being over family peace. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Patel. "Emergency at the clinic. Can you come in? I know it's your night off, but we have a complex surgery and could use your expertise." Maya smiled as she typed back her agreement. 6 months ago, she would have resented the interruption to her personal time. Now she recognized the text for what it was: validation of her professional skills, an acknowledgement that she was valued and needed for her competence, rather than her willingness to absorb chaos. 1 year later, Maya walked across the stage at the Tenuity Colony graduation ceremony, accepting her certificate in veterinary practice management. The crowd was small but enthusiastic. Elena and her family, Sophia and her husband, Marcus and his foster sister, Mrs. Chen from her apartment building, Dr. Patel, and several colleagues from the clinic. Even Mrs. Henderson had come, wearing her best dress and carrying a small bouquet of flowers from her garden. As Maya posed for photos with her chosen family, she spotted a familiar figure standing at the edge of the crowd. Roberto Rodriguez watched from a distance, his face a mixture of pride and regret. They'd been meeting monthly in therapy sessions, slowly rebuilding a relationship based on honesty rather than enabling. It was slow work, but Maya had begun to see glimpses of the father she'd always needed, the one who could be proud of her successes without expecting her to manage his guilt. Carmen was not there by mutual agreement. She was doing well in her therapy program, according to Roberto, working part-time at a nonprofit and living in a supervised group home for people transitioning out of treatment programs. Maya wished her sister well, but from a distance. Some relationships, Maya had learned, could be healed but not resumed. After the ceremony, Maya's group went to Murphy's Pub for celebration drinks. Maya found herself laughing freely, surrounded by people who celebrated her achievements without reservation or hidden agendas. Dr. Patel announced that the clinic was expanding, and Maya would be managing the new location, a promotion that came with a substantial raise and the respect she'd always deserved. To Maya, Elena raised her glass, who taught all of us that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. 2 years later, Maya married David Chen, Mrs. Chen's grandson, in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. David was a software engineer who had grown up watching his grandmother be kind to Maya when Maya's own family failed her. Their love story had begun with Mrs. Chen's shameless matchmaking and blossomed into something Maya had never thought possible, a relationship built on mutual respect, shared values, and the absence of drama. The wedding was everything Maya had dreamed of as a little girl. Small, intimate, filled with people who genuinely wanted to celebrate her happiness. Roberto walked her down the aisle, tears streaming down his face. Carmen sent a card, a simple note wishing Maya happiness and thanking her for setting the boundaries that had forced the family to get healthy. Maya's chosen family filled the front rows. Elena served as maid of honor. Sophia provided the wedding cake. Marcus officiated the ceremony. He'd gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. And Mrs. Chen wept happy tears as her grandson promised to love and honor the woman she had taken under her wing years ago. During the reception, Maya found herself thinking about the Ring doorbell footage that had changed everything. The technology that had captured her family's betrayal had also been the catalyst for her liberation. Sometimes, Maya reflected, the worst thing that happens to you can also be the best thing, not because the pain doesn't matter, but because it forces you to make choices you might not have had the courage to make otherwise. 5 years later, Maya stood in the nursery of her new house, painting the walls a soft yellow while her 8-month pregnant belly made the task more challenging than it used to be. She and David had bought the house 6 months ago. A modest Victorian with a large garden where Maya grew vegetables and David built furniture in his workshop. The nursery faced east, filling with morning light that would wake their daughter gently each day. Maya had already decided that this child would grow up differently than she had, surrounded by adults who modeled healthy conflict resolution, who took responsibility for their own emotions, who protected rather than sacrificed the innocent. Maya's support group had evolved into a formal nonprofit organization, with Maya serving as executive director. They ran educational workshops for families dealing with mental illness, teaching parents how to support struggling children without enabling abusive behavior or sacrificing other family members. The work was deeply satisfying, turning Maya's painful experiences into something that could help others avoid similar trauma. Roberto visited monthly, spending time with Maya and David and preparing to be a grandfather who would do better the second time around. He'd completed his therapy program and maintained a careful relationship with Carmen, who was now married and living independently, but still required structure and accountability. The family dynamics had fundamentally changed, no longer centered around crisis management, but built on honest communication and appropriate boundaries. Carmen had written Maya a letter when she heard about the pregnancy, expressing genuine happiness for her sister's new family and gratitude for the painful interventions that had forced her to get healthy. They weren't close, might never be close, but they'd found a way to coexist without drama or manipulation. As Maya put the finishing touches on the nursery walls, she thought about the daughter who would soon sleep in this room. This child would never doubt whether her perceptions were accurate, never be told that love required accepting unacceptable behavior, never be sacrificed to keep peace with someone else's dysfunction. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Can't wait to meet my honorary niece. Aunt Elena is ready for babysitting duty." Maya smiled, thinking about the village of chosen family that would help raise this little girl. Extended family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about finding people who loved you enough to tell you the truth, even when the truth was difficult to hear. 10 years later, Maya's daughter Emma ran through the garden behind their house, her dark hair streaming behind her as she chased butterflies with the focused intensity that 5-year-olds brought to everything they did. David was teaching Emma how to plant tomatoes, showing her how to make holes the right depth for the seedlings. Maya watched from the kitchen window as she prepared lunch for the family they'd built together. The simplicity of this life still amazed her. The way days could pass without crisis, the way love could exist without conditions, the way happiness could be sustained rather than stolen. Emma had never met Carmen, though she knew she had an aunt who lived far away and sent birthday cards. Maya had decided that when Emma was older, she would tell her daughter about the importance of boundaries, about the difference between loving someone and enabling their harmful behavior, and the courage it takes to choose your own well-being over family expectations. For now, Emma lived in the safety Maya had created for her, surrounded by adults who communicated honestly, who took responsibility for their emotions, who celebrated her successes without hidden agendas. Maya's daughter would grow up knowing she was valuable not for what she could endure or manage, but simply for who she was. The support group Maya had started now operated in 12 locations across 3 states, helping hundreds of families navigate the complex intersection of mental illness and healthy boundaries. Maya had written a book about her experiences, though she'd published it under pseudonym to protect her family's privacy. The book had become a resource for therapists and social workers dealing with similar cases. Maya's professional life had flourished beyond anything she'd imagined as a young woman absorbing her family's chaos. She now owned 3 veterinary clinics and employed 15 people, many of whom she'd specifically hired because they were survivors, rebuilding their lives after leaving toxic family situations. 15 years later, Emma Rodriguez Chen stood at her high school graduation, valedictorian of her class, preparing to attend Northwestern University on a full academic scholarship. Maya sat in the auditorium with David, Roberto, Elena's family, and the extended chosen family that had gathered to celebrate this milestone. Maya thought about the college applications she'd lost 15 years ago because of Carmen's sabotage, and how that disappointment had led her down a different path that ultimately brought her to this moment. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you redirected you toward better things than you'd originally planned. Roberto, now in his 70s, squeezed Maya's hand as Emma took the stage to deliver her valedictorian speech. His relationship with Maya had been rebuilt slowly over the years, based on consistent therapy, genuine accountability, and his commitment to being the grandfather Emma deserved. Emma's speech focused on the importance of chosen family, on the adults who had shown her what healthy relationships looked like, on the mother who had modeled the courage to walk away from toxicity, even when it was family. Maya felt tears slip down her cheeks as her daughter publicly thanked her for creating a life where love didn't require sacrifice, where success was celebrated rather than sabotaged, where truth was valued over peace. After the ceremony, Maya's extended family gathered for a celebration dinner. Emma moved between the adults who had raised her, collecting hugs and congratulations from people who had earned their place in her life through consistency and care rather than biological obligation. Maya stepped outside onto the restaurant's patio, needing a moment to process the overwhelming gratitude she felt for the life she'd built. David joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Walking away from your original family?" Maya thought about Carmen, who was now a grandmother herself, living quietly in another state with the help of ongoing therapy and medication management. She thought about the years of pain that had led to this moment of joy, about the Ring doorbell footage that had given her permission to trust her own reality. "I regret that it was necessary," Maya said finally, "but I don't regret choosing myself. I don't regret choosing truth over peace, and I definitely don't regret creating this life for Emma." As they watched their daughter through the restaurant window, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally without asking her to minimize herself in return, Maya felt the deep satisfaction that comes from breaking generational cycles of dysfunction and replacing them with something healthy and whole. 20 years later, Maya Rodriguez Chen sat in her home office, now in her 60s, putting the finishing touches on the second edition of her book about family emotional abuse. The first edition had helped thousands of families navigate similar situations, and this updated version included 20 years of additional insights from her work with survivors. Through her window, she could see her 3 grandchildren playing in the garden with their grandfather David, now retired and devoted to teaching the next generation about growing things, building things, and the satisfaction of creating rather than destroying. Maya had followed in Maya's footsteps in some ways, becoming a therapist who specialized in family systems and boundary setting. She'd married a kind man who supported her work and shared her commitment to healthy relationships. Their children were growing up as Maya had intended, surrounded by adults who modeled respect, accountability, and the kind of love that didn't require sacrifice. Maya's phone rang with a call from one of her former support group members, now a successful social worker running her own practice. These calls came regularly, updates from the hundreds of people Maya had helped over the years, checking in to share successes and express gratitude for the community she'd created. The nonprofit Maya had founded was now run by a board of survivors, operating programs in all 50 states and internationally. Maya served as an emeritus advisor, sharing her expertise while letting younger voices lead the organization forward. Sometimes Maya received letters from people who had read her book or attended her workshops, thanking her for giving them permission to choose themselves over family dysfunction. These letters always moved her, reminding her that her painful experiences had been transformed into something that could heal others. Roberto had passed away 3 years earlier, surrounded by the family he'd learned to love properly in his final decades.
Maya had been holding his hand when he died, and his last words had been an apology for the years he'd prioritized keeping peace over protecting her. Maya had forgiven him by then, understanding that good people could make terrible choices when they were motivated by fear rather than wisdom. Carmen had sent flowers to Roberto's funeral, but had not attended. She and Maya had exchanged a few letters over the years, polite updates about their separate lives, acknowledgments of shared grief when Roberto died, expressions of gratitude for the boundaries that had allowed them both to heal. They would never be close, but they'd found a way to exist in the same world without damaging each other. As evening approached, Maya walked through the house she and David had shared for nearly 25 years. The walls were covered with photos of their chosen family, Elena's children and grandchildren, Sophia's extended clan, Marcus and his foster siblings, the dozens of support group members who had become like family over the years. Maya paused at a photo from Emma's wedding 5 years earlier, surrounded by the people who had helped raise her. In the picture, Maya was laughing at something Elena had said, her face bright with joy and free from the anxiety that had defined her younger years. Maya stood at her kitchen window on a crisp October morning, exactly 25 years after the night Carmen had burned her belongings. The anniversary had become something unexpected over the years, not a day of mourning, but a day of gratitude for the moment that had finally forced her to choose herself. At 67, Maya had silver threading through her dark hair and laugh lines that spoke of decades spent in joy rather than crisis management. Her hands, still steady from years of veterinary work, now spent their time writing, gardening, and spoiling grandchildren who would never know what it felt like to walk on eggshells in their own home. The doorbell rang, and Maya smiled as she heard Emma's voice calling out, "Mom, we're here!" Her daughter entered with Maya's 3 grandchildren, Sophia, age 12, Roberto, age 10, and little Carmen, age 6. Yes, Carmen. Emma had chosen the name deliberately, not to honor Maya's sister, but to reclaim it, to give it new meaning in their family story. "Grandma Maya!" 6-year-old Carmen launched herself into Maya's arms with the fearless affection that came from never having had love used as a weapon against her. "Daddy said you're going to tell us a story today, the important one." Maya's heart swelled as she looked at her granddaughter, this little Carmen who would grow up knowing that her worth was unconditional, that love didn't require sacrifice, that families could be healthy and whole. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that she was raising a Carmen who would experience everything her sister never had: boundaries, accountability, and adults who prioritized her well-being over keeping peace. "I am," Maya said, as she settled into her favorite chair as the children arranged themselves around her feet. Elena curled up on the sofa, David bringing tea for the adults, while the children chose juice boxes from the refrigerator they knew they could always raid without permission. Maya had been preparing for this conversation for months. Sophia, her eldest grandchild, had started asking pointed questions about why they never saw Aunt Carmen, why Roberto had lived with them in his final years instead of with his other daughter, why Maya's side of the family was so small. Emma had suggested it was time for an age-appropriate version of the truth. "A long time ago," Maya began, "when I was about your mom's age, I learned something very important about the difference between love and control, between family and chosen family, between peace and justice." She told them a simplified version of the story about a sister who had been very sick in her mind and heart, about parents who made mistakes trying to help her, about Maya learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step away from people who hurt you, even when they're family. "But Grandma," Roberto interrupted, his 10-year-old sense of justice clearly disturbed, "why didn't the grown-ups protect you?" Maya smiled at the question that had taken her decades to answer. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups get scared and confused, and they make decisions based on fear instead of wisdom. Your great-grandfather was terrified of losing Aunt Carmen, so he sacrificed me to try to save her. He thought I was stronger and could handle more damage." "That's not fair," Sophia declared, with the moral clarity that came from being raised in a healthy family. "You're right," Maya agreed. It wasn't fair. And that's why your mom and I decided that our family would work differently. In our family, no one gets sacrificed for someone else's comfort. In our family, we tell the truth, even when it's difficult. In our family, love doesn't mean accepting behavior that hurts you. Little Carmen, who had been listening with the intense focus she brought to all important conversations, raised her hand as if she were in school. Grandma Maya, are you sad that you don't have a sister anymore? Maya considered the question carefully. I'm sad that we never got to be real sisters, she said finally. I'm sad that Aunt Carmen was too sick to love me in a healthy way, and that she chose to hurt me instead of getting help. But I'm not sad that I chose to protect myself and build a new kind of family with people who could love me properly. She gestured around the room, at the photos covering every surface. Decades of chosen family celebrations, graduations, weddings, births, ordinary Tuesday dinners that had become extraordinary because they were peaceful. You see, my loves, I learned that family isn't always about blood. Family is about people who show up for you consistently, who celebrate your successes without jealousy, who tell you the truth even when it's hard to hear, who respect your boundaries and treat you with kindness. Emma squeezed Maya's hand, understanding the layers of meaning in her mother's words. Emma had grown up surrounded by Aunt Elena, Uncle Marcus, Grandma Sophia from the bakery, Mrs. Chen from next door, and dozens of other relatives who had earned their place through love and consistency rather than genetics. Will we ever meet Aunt Carmen? Sophia asked with the curiosity of a 12-year-old trying to understand adult complexities. Probably not, Maya said honestly. Aunt Carmen is doing better now. She got help and learned to manage her illness and take responsibility for her actions. But some relationships can't be repaired even when people change. Sometimes the healthiest thing is to wish someone well from a distance. Maya had received updates about Carmen over the years through Christmas cards and occasional messages passed through mutual acquaintances. Carmen had completed intensive therapy, maintained stable employment for over a decade, married a man who understood her history and helped her stay accountable. She had children of her own now, and by all accounts, she was breaking the cycle of dysfunction with the next generation. Maya was genuinely glad that Carmen had found health and happiness, but gladness from a distance was enough. Some bridges once burned were meant to stay burned, not out of spite, but out of wisdom.
The most important thing I want you to remember, Maya continued, looking at each grandchild in turn, is that you are valuable exactly as you are. You don't have to earn love by managing other people's emotions. You don't have to minimize yourself to make others comfortable. You don't have to forgive people who hurt you just because they're family. David cleared his throat from his spot by the window. Your grandmother, he said with the pride that still lit up his voice after 30 years of marriage, taught all of us what real love looks like. She taught us that the people who truly love you want you to have boundaries, want you to stand up for yourself, want you to be happy and successful and confident. As the afternoon wore on, the children played in the garden while the adults prepared dinner. Maya found herself thinking about the Ring doorbell that had changed everything 25 years ago. Technology had evolved dramatically since then, but the basic human need for truth, for validation, for someone to witness and believe your reality, that remained constant. Maya had learned to be her own witness now. She no longer needed external validation to trust her perceptions, no longer waited for permission to protect herself from harm. The frightened young woman who had stood on that sidewalk 25 years ago, clutching a bus token and a borrowed bag of clothes, had grown into someone who understood her own worth. During dinner, little Carmen spilled juice on her dress and immediately began to cry, not from pain, but from embarrassment. Maya watched Emma handle the situation with the calm competence that came from growing up in a home where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than crises. It's just juice, sweetheart, Emma said, dabbing at the stain with a wet cloth. We can wash it out, and even if we can't, it's just a dress. You're more important than any piece of clothing. Maya felt tears spring to her eyes at the casual way Emma prioritized her daughter's emotional well-being over material possessions. This little Carmen would never experience the terror of having her belongings destroyed as punishment for existing, never learn to hide her successes, to avoid someone else's jealousy, never mistake crisis management for love. As the family gathered for their traditional post-dinner game night, Maya excused herself for a moment and walked out to her back garden. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of falling leaves and the last roses of the season. She stood in the spot where David had built her a small memorial garden, not for anyone who had died, but for the life she had left behind. The garden contained plants that represented rebirth and resilience, Japanese maples that blazed red in autumn before regenerating each spring, lavender that released its calming scent when touched, rosemary for remembrance of lessons learned. At the center stood a small stone bench with an inscription Emma had chosen for Maya's 60th birthday. She believed she could, so she did. Maya sat on the bench and pulled out her phone, scrawling to a text message she'd received that morning from a young woman in Seattle who had read Maya's book and attended a virtual support group session. Mrs. Rodriguez-Chen, I wanted you to know that your story gave me the courage to leave my toxic family situation. It's been 6 months since choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Because of your example, I'm finally free. Messages like this arrived regularly, sometimes daily. Maya had stopped counting how many people had reached out over the years to say that her story had given them permission to prioritize their own well-being, to trust their own perceptions, to walk away from family situations that were destroying them. This, Maya realized, was the true legacy of that terrible October night 25 years ago. Carmen's cruelty had inadvertently become the catalyst for Maya's liberation, which had become the foundation for Emma's healthy childhood, which had become the inspiration for hundreds of other survivors to choose themselves. Maya heard laughter drifting from the house, her grandchildren giggling over a board game, David and Emma engaged in the kind of playful banter that came from relationships built on mutual respect rather than walking on eggshells. This was what love actually looked like. Easy, consistent, generous, free from the exhausting work of crisis management. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from Elena, now a grandmother herself. Thinking of you today. 25 years ago, you made the bravest decision of your life. Look what you built from those ashes. Maya smiled, remembering Elena's mother making them Puerto Rican comfort food in her kitchen all those years ago, never asking too many questions when Maya showed up with red eyes and fresh bruises to her spirit. Mrs. Vasquez had passed away 5 years earlier, but not before seeing Maya happily married, professionally successful, and surrounded by the chosen family she deserved. As full darkness settled over the garden, Maya walked back toward the house, its windows glowing with warm light and the sounds of a family that had never known dysfunction as normal. She paused at the back door, taking one last look at the life she had built from the ashes of the life that had been stolen from her. Maya had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending the damage hadn't happened. Healing was about transforming pain into purpose, isolation into connection, and silence into truth-telling. Healing was about raising children who would never accept abuse as love, grandchildren who would never mistake peacekeeping for peace. Inside, little Carmen was curled up in David's lap, fighting sleep as he read her a story about a brave princess who saved herself instead of waiting for rescue. Sophia was showing Emma something she'd drawn, a family tree that included all their chosen relatives, with Maya at the center, surrounded by hearts. Roberto was carefully arranging his Monopoly properties, taking the game as seriously as his great-grandfather once had. Maya settled back into her chair, accepting a cup of tea from Emma, and felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had broken every destructive pattern that had been handed down to her. Her lineage would be one of truth-telling, boundary-setting, and the radical act of choosing love over loyalty, health over harmony. "Grandma Maya," Sophia said suddenly, looking up from her drawing, "I'm proud of you for being brave enough to choose yourself, because if you hadn't, we wouldn't exist." Maya felt tears slip down her cheeks, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude for the wisdom of a 12-year-old who understood what it had taken Maya decades to learn, that choosing yourself isn't selfish when it creates space for healthier love to grow. As the evening wound down and the grandchildren reluctantly prepared to go home, Maya stood at her front door, watching Emma buckle car seats and distribute forgotten jackets. This ordinary moment, helping children into coats, checking for lost toys, promising phone calls tomorrow, was everything Maya had never had as a child, and everything she had made sure her daughter possessed in abundance. "Thank you," Emma said quietly as she hugged Maya goodbye, "for showing me what real strength looks like, for teaching me that love doesn't require sacrifice, for creating a family where truth matters more than peace." After they left, Maya and David cleaned up in comfortable silence, moving around each other with the practiced ease of 30 years together. Maya found herself thinking about Carmen again, not with anger or regret, but with something approaching compassion. Carmen had been as much a victim of their family's dysfunction as Maya had been, just in different ways. The difference was that Maya had chosen healing, while Carmen had chosen destruction, until she was finally forced to choose differently. Before bed, Maya walked through her house one more time, turning off lights and checking locks. Every room told the story of a life consciously constructed: photos of chosen family, books about healing and growth, artwork created by friends and grandchildren, furniture selected for comfort rather than show. In her office, Maya's latest manuscript sat on her desk, a guide for therapists working with families dealing with mental illness and abuse. The book would be her 10th, adding to the growing body of literature about healthy boundaries, family trauma, and the courage it takes to choose truth over peace. Maya paused at her bedroom window, looking out into the neighborhood where she had lived for over 20 years. Mrs. Chen still lives next door, now 93, and tended to by the grandson she introduced to Maya so many years ago. The Hendersons' old house had new owners, a young family with small children who played in the yard where Maya had once stood, clutching a bus token, and wondering if she was strong enough to leave.
She was strong enough. She had always been strong enough. The Ring doorbell footage had simply given her permission to trust what she already knew in her heart. As Maya settled into bed beside the man who had loved her consistently for 30 years, she reflected on the strange grace that could emerge from even the most painful circumstances. Carmen's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. Roberto's enabling had been harmful, but it had taught Maya what not to accept in relationships. The family's dysfunction had been destructive, but walking away from it had led Maya to discover what healthy love actually looked like. Maya's last thought before sleep was of her 3 grandchildren, growing up in the safety she had created for them. They would never know the anxiety of waiting for the next emotional explosion, never learn to minimize themselves to keep peace, never confuse crisis management with love. They would grow up understanding that they were valuable exactly as they were, that boundaries were acts of love, that truth was more important than harmony. This was Maya's true legacy, not the books she had written or the support groups she had founded, but the generational cycle she had broken. The frightened young woman who had stood in a backyard full of ashes 25 years ago had become the grandmother who could promise her descendants that love didn't require sacrifice, that family meant safety, that choosing yourself was the most generous thing you could do for the people who truly loved you. tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help other survivors find their way to freedom. But tonight, Maya Rodriguez Chen fell asleep in perfect peace, surrounded by the family she had built from scratch and the love she had learned to believe she deserved. The Ring doorbell had recorded the truth of her family's dysfunction. But Maya's life had become a recording of something far more powerful, proof that it was never too late to choose yourself, never too late to build something beautiful from the ashes of what others had burned down, never too late to teach the next generation what love actually looked like when it was free from fear, manipulation, and the exhausting work of keeping peace at any cost. In the end, that was the story Maya wanted to be remembered for. Not the sister who had betrayed her, but the woman who had refused to let that betrayal define her future. Not the family that had failed her, but the family she had created to replace it. Not the victim she had been, but the survivor she had chosen to become.